I have news for you, but first, I don't want to keep him waiting. It's funny. I was reading this article last night, and sometimes you just take a chance and you reach out to someone and they're willing to come on with you and talk about it. And this story is so cool. Today, of course, is the anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. I say anniversary. Anniversary connotes a happy thing that happened, and this wasn't. This was an attack on America that killed thousands of our service members and injured many more. It was a horrible day, and it was what kickstarted America being involved in World War II. You think that there's really nothing good that could come out of that. But this story in the Press Democrat, written by this amazing writer, Chris Smith, details this really cool love story. So I wanted to bring Chris on to talk a little bit more about it and to tell us the story. He talked to one of the members of this couple. So let's bring on Chris to talk about December 7th and what happened there. Hi, Chris.
Hey, good morning, Kim, or good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Yeah, it is. It is afternoon now. I'm so lucky that you agreed to come on. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, I was thrilled to be asked, and thank you. And I will tell you that I was for about 45 years. I was a newspaper reporter and columnist, most of it up here in Sonoma County for the Press Democrat. And sometimes, and you're in media, sometimes people ask you, "What's your favorite story?"
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to decide, but this might be my favorite story.
Oh yeah. Well, this is one of my favorites. Reading it, it was like I couldn't stop. I wanted it to go on and on forever. I wanted to know more about them. It's one of those, it's almost like a novel.
Well, you want me to just kind of run through it?
Yes, please tell us what happened. So to take us back, it's what, December 7th of 1941.
1941.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a sailor aboard the West Virginia, and there were 6 battleships. They were moored in tight formation there by Ford Island. There were 8 battleships in Pearl Harbor that day. And we all know it was a beautiful Sunday morning, and most of the sailors were not going to have to work that day. And so down within the belly of the West Virginia, a fire controlman 3rd class, Dean Darrow of Wisconsin, was standing in front of his locker in his shorts, trying to decide which pair of pants that he was going to wear to go into Honolulu and do some Christmas shopping. And then it began. There was the call to general stations, and very soon, this sailor, like everyone else, ran to his battle station, and then the West Virginia started being hit by torpedoes. And at one point, Dean Darrow was on the deck and was blown off into the water. So now he's in the water, the oily, burning water of Pearl Harbor. And he remembers pulling himself and being pulled up onto a skiff, up onto a rescue boat. And then he said he remembers somebody say, "Duck!" And then the lights went out for Dean Darrow. He wakes up, he's 3 days later, and America is now at war. And he is told that he was treated for a small wound on his back.
Okay.
And they x-rayed him, they patched him up, couldn't do anything else for him. And I mentioned in the story that he was grateful to get any care at all. Can you imagine what the hospital scene was like? And at the hospital shift,
it must
over
have been
1,000
chaos. Yeah.
2,400 dead.
Yeah.
And he comes in with a little hole in his back. And so they take care of him. And now he is sent onto a destroyer because the West Virginia has sunk to the sitting on the bottom. He knows that something is just not right. He turned 25 years old in January. He's a big, husky, healthy young man. But if he did anything very strenuous, like one day he was swimming and he got out and he felt that his heart was pounding, and he felt dizzy, and actually he a couple times fainted. If he exerted himself, he would pass out. Well, this ain't right. And he asked a corpsman to look at him. The corpsman guessed that it was battle fatigue. Um, well, finally, Dean Darrow cannot get
Which
out of the
what is
bunk.
battle fatigue? Is that like PTSD or is it a
I
mental
think so.
condition?
That's,
Yeah,
you know, and
okay.
I shouldn't. I'm not. Sadly, I'm not a veteran, but I
Yeah,
think battle fatigue might be this similar to. You're just not. You've got. You're not yourself. You're
right.
distressed.
Yeah.
So I think it probably is similar.
Mhm.
So um, he finally can't get out of his bunk. So he is moved to. He is examined again, and they did have X-rays back then, and they find something that they had missed before on the X-ray when they previously looked at the X-ray back in at Pearl Harbor. They may have thought that this thing that they were seeing in the X-ray was a shadow, but they looked at it more closely and they see that he has a bullet about this long, 7.7 millimeter machine gun bullet is in the wall of his heart. It's stuck in his heart. It had gone through his back and had stopped. That's one of the very amazing parts of the story. You know, why did it stop? Why
Mhm.
did it go right through him? And we would not be having this discussion, you know.
Right.
So they move him, they put him on a boat with other wounded and others who needed to go to California, and they shipped him to the San Francisco Bay Area. We've heard of that. And to the,
Welcome.
yeah, to the Mare Island.
Meanwhile, he's being shipped and he's still got this bullet stuck in his
He
heart.
still got this bullet in his back. Yeah, there's a bullet in his heart, and it is now March. So from December 7, all of December, all of January, all of February. Now it's early March, and he has been told that he's been walking around with a bullet in his heart in 1942. So there was this buzz about at the Mare Island Naval Hospital that a sailor is coming in from Pearl Harbor. They've seen a lot of wounded people from
Yeah.
Pearl Harbor at Mare Island, and there's their sailor coming in with what? With a bullet in his heart. And so there was quite a buzz, you can imagine. And there was a nurse, and her name was Alice Beck, and she was a native of California. She'd become a nurse. She joined the Navy in 1941, and um, and now was working as a nurse at the Mare Island Naval Hospital. She hears about him. They're all anxious to see him, see what he looks like. How does a man look with a bullet in his heart? And she remembers meeting him, greeting him, said, "Welcome to our hospital." And then she was asked or assigned to be his nurse. She's the one. So now this man is her patient. Ah, you got the picture. That's so
Mhm.
nice. So there they are. And it was not until April 17th that this surgery was performed, because there was a lot of workup. There's a lot of planning and preparation. There was open heart surgery in those days, but obviously it was rudimentary, and no one,
Yeah.
as far as anybody knew, as far as I know, no one had ever pulled a bullet out of a live heart. And so now he is scheduled for surgery. And and I have known Alice. I'll just tell you quickly that I met her in 1991, and I met him
Oh.
in 1991.
Oh my goodness. So you've known
That,
them and their story for years.
I've known them since
Okay.
since
Yeah.
1990. Now, I went up to Lake County. They were living in Kelseyville, right on right near the lake, and I did a series of stories. That was my introduction to Pearl Harbor. 1991 was the 50th anniversary. So
Mhm.
I interviewed a number of our Pearl Harbor survivors. Remember, there were a bunch of them then. In 1991, for the
Yeah.
50th, these men and women were only in their 70s, right? They were
Yeah.
still, much younger. I mean, they were still
Yeah.
vital, very vital and vigorous, and they were partying, and they had a wonderful fraternity. The Pearl Harbor Survivors Association. Some of these people, this was their primary social group, was their fellows who had been at
Wow.
Pearl Harbor on that day. I mean, if you can imagine, talk about a shared
Experience. Yeah.
experience. I mean, I'm not sure there was a more significant day in modern American history, as you say, than
Right.
the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Right.
So I met them. I met Dean Darrow, and I looked through their scrapbook, and he's got these stories and photos. There were news stories back in the time about this extraordinary thing that happened. So, no one, jumping back to Mare Island, Alice says nobody believed that he was going to survive this surgery. They're going to pull a bullet out of his heart. And she said that he didn't think he was going to live. That he would say, as the surgery approached, he says, four more days to live, 3 more days to live. And she said they actually kind of got tired of it. The people at the hospital kind of got tired of this sailor saying, well, see you on the other side.
Yeah, I'm on a ticking time clock over here. Right.
I'm about out of here. I think pretty much just before they wheel him in, he says to her name was Alice Beck, and her nickname, everybody gets a nickname, was Becky. He says, Miss Becky, if I come through this, would you go on liberty with me? And nurses or officers, they're not supposed to be fraternizing with
No,
patients.
can't do that. Right.
Enlisted men. Mm-hmm. But she's thinking, what are the chances that this guy's going to come out? Sure, I'll go out with you.
Yeah, I'll go out on a date with you. You're not going to make it through this anyway, right?
No problem.
Yeah.
So he goes into the surgery, and is a noted Stanford surgeon. Went in from the front. I think he had to cut or break a couple of ribs, and then he has to push the lungs aside, and he comes around chest. And finds, then he finds that bullet. And again, it was protruding. It was just basically, it's this long, and it was only into the heart. Yeah, then you can see a note how that bullet is scarred and scratched and damaged. Mm-hmm. That's significant. Anyway, he gets the forceps on it, tries to pull it out, can't pull it out, and then just realizes that it's kind of a suction. It's a vacuum. So he sticks a needle or something in alongside it, breaks the vacuum, and the thing pops right out. So the heart is out, and I don't think there was, as far as I know, there was no substantial damage to the heart. It was the wall of the heart. It hadn't penetrated into the chamber.
That's crazy.
So the next thing this doctor walks in to the sailor, and it says, sailor, and he shows him and says, if you don't mind, I'd like to keep this. And Dean Darrow says, I'm sorry, sir, but I'll be keeping that bullet. So the next thing that happened, he opens his eyes, and there's Alice. There's Becky, his nurse. Mm-hmm. He goes, hey, I guess we're going on liberty. What can she say?
She said she'd go. She's got to do it.
She said she'd go. As I said in the story, a promise is a promise.
That's right.
So they got on. It was about 6 more weeks, before this guy's up and around, and they took a bus into San Francisco, and they saw a movie, and they got a hamburger or something, and then it was on between the two of them, and so that was April, May. So that was maybe June. Well, in August 1, they took a bus to Reno and were married. Oh. And kind of chokes me up.
Yeah. So this injury that he sustained on December 7th of 1941, when bombs were being dropped and his ship is sunk, and he goes to the hospital.
Right.
And he meets this woman who becomes his wife, and they have a life.
Well, they had a real life. He worked in the maritime industry. He did some international travel. They traveled. They live in Pleasant Hill. They raised 4 children. Those children have given them more than a dozen grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They worked their career. He worked his career. They moved to Lake County, and they became essential to this
Mhm.
group of Pearl Harbor survivors. It's the most wonderful group of people. And one by one, and I met them, and then one by one, I wrote their obituaries. Um,
Oh, ugh.
but here she is still with us, and she loves to tell the story. Well, she is still speaking. I mentioned that she, on this past Memorial Day, May, she came back up here to Sonoma County and she spoke at the Memorial Day commemoration in Rohnert Park. And she told the whole story. And she's 104 years old. I mean, think
Wow.
how many 104-year-olds are standing up in front of groups and telling stories. That's so typical a picture of her. She's full of life. She's one of the kindest, sweetest, most genuine, just entirely endearing people I've ever met. And then she spoke again. She spoke at a Rotary Club in Vallejo right after Veterans Day this year. That was only a month ago. And she spoke and she told the story. So she
Is this
tells the
her at
story.
104? Because she looks amazing.
She, well, she is not 104 in that picture, but she's 100 and
Okay.
something,
Yeah.
maybe,
Wow.
yeah, she doesn't look any different.
And
Um,
she's traveling around the
oh,
world with her
yeah,
family?
she now lives with her daughter and a son-in-law. They just took a 6-week cruise through the Mediterranean and then across the Atlantic Ocean. And they play cards, and she goes out and speaks. She's truly, and earlier this year she fell and broke her leg,
Yeah.
and then she healed like as though she were 70.
Wow.
So she's indomitable, and she's so sweet. So Dean Darrow, he died in 1991. I mentioned to you that I came up and I met them in Lake County, and we spoke about this experience, and I wrote about them for the 50th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. He died 2 weeks later.
Ugh.
Dean Darrow died 2 weeks later, so he made it. He sort of like he barely made it to the 50-year anniversary of Pearl Harbor, so
Mhm.
not so bad, given that he could have been obviously one of the
Yeah.
fatalities that day. But he used to tell people um, that the best thing, he said, the best thing I got out of the Navy, and he'd say, my nurse. He'd love to tell people stories. The best thing I got out of the Navy was my nurse.
You
And
know,
yes.
I was just gonna say, a lot of people have a love story, but that is a heck of a love story.
Well,
I mean,
I
that's one of the best, how did you guys meet? Well, let me tell you, right?
yeah, I was a nurse when
Yeah.
he came in. And
Yeah.
then when she pulls out that bullet, she says, when she shows the bullet, she says, when they removed this bullet, it left a void in his heart that I was able to fill with my love.
Oh,
Please. And I can tell you, I have held that bullet in my hand in amazing. Oh, and again, it's all dented up and banged up.
yeah.
They figured, when a strafing fighter comes in, he's right off the deck. He's not 1,000 feet up. He's right off the
Hmm.
deck. So he fired that bullet, and for this to be dinged up and for him to be alive, the presumption is that it struck the West Virginia, or it struck somewhere and bounced around and slowed down. So when it entered his back, it was going so much slower than normal.
Oh.
Then that's why it stopped.
And that's
If
probably
it
why it didn't just rip through his heart, right?
if it had gone right through
Yeah.
his heart, um, be a different story. So it's sort of I just wrote recently about the JFK the 60th anniversary of that, and the talk of
Hmm.
miracle bullet. Well, this is a miracle bullet for sure.
It is in a
Um,
different way.
yeah, because
Yeah.
if it gone directly from that gun to that sailor,
Yeah.
would have been all over.
That would have been all over. And all those grandkids and all those great grandkids wouldn't be here. So
Amazing.
You kind of mentioned this whole community of Pearl Harbor survivors, the people that went through that. And we know that Alice is 100 and did you say 104?
Hmm.
And so we're losing this generation of people that remember this. When you talk to them over the years and other survivors of Pearl Harbor, if you had gone up to meet their group, what were some of the things that they told you that may have stood out to you?
Well, some that stands out is just what they saw and what they
Hmm.
witnessed, right? And we've all heard the account that, hey, my dad never talked about it,
Yeah.
my grandfather never talked about it, my brother never talked about it. And I think at one point maybe that I just kind of assumed that was maybe a false modesty, or they just don't want the.
Oh, you froze with
I
us.
would talk to
Oh, there you
these
are.
guys, and they saw their. I mean, I'm sorry, but you know
It's hard, I know.
they saw their buddies blown to bits
Yeah.
and burned to death.
Yeah.
And why would you want to talk about that?
No.
Why would you want to talk about that? And then the other thing is that these veterans resist, many of them, the hero treatment,
Yeah.
because they the heroes to them are beneath the crosses, and so I don't think they care to garner a lot of attention. But to talk to some of these guys and the stories and the things that they saw, um, there was one that worked aboard the hospital ship Solace, and this Dean Darrow went onto the hospital ship Solace, and this one gentleman talked about he was given his patient was burned throughout his body,
Yeah.
and this is how he tried to encourage this man, and how he felt the day that sailor was discharged from the Solace,
Talk
and
about heroes.
and survived.
Yeah.
Well, this isn't exactly answering your question, but I think I grew up watching John Wayne. I like John Wayne and
Mm-hmm.
Vic Morrow, and um, I think I grew up with this notion. I mean, you watch war movies. What do you
Right.
see? These guys,
Big, rough,
these
and tough guys. Yeah.
rough and tough, and they're killing
Mm-hmm.
machines, or maybe they aren't, but they're warriors. They're warriors,
Mm-hmm.
and there are people like that. I give them that, but it took me a few minutes for it to dawn on me that truly these troops, these servicemen who were at Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December 1941 were 18 years old, 19 years old,
Mm-hmm.
some of them 17 years old, 20 years old. And why were they there? Because they wanted to go shoot people up? No, they needed a job. The Depression was on. And I'm not saying that there wasn't a degree of patriotism, but these guys, when thousands of people signed up, enlisted for the military on the 8th of December, obviously,
Yep.
you know people stood in line to join. Well, these guys joined in 1940, 1941, before we were at war. And they a lot, and truly a lot of them had never been on a ship, a lot of them have never been on an airplane. you know they needed a job, they wanted to serve their country, they thought they might like to see this might
The
allow them to
world.
see the world.
Right. Yeah.
But they were they were the kid next door.
Yeah.
And to imagine what they witnessed that day, the
Yeah.
pandemonium and the hell and the stench and all, but it certainly forged their lives. Because then another thing I had to remind myself We talk about Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor. These guys were at Pearl Harbor. Well, they were at Pearl Harbor, but then all of them who survived, except I mean, Dean got his he got his honorable discharge because he had a
Hmm.
bullet in his heart.
Yeah.
These guys
One
fought the
would
whole
hope.
war. Then,
Yeah.
they weren't just at Pearl Harbor; they fought the whole war.
Yeah. They were off to what other Pacific islands and, you
Every
know,
they
Germany,
were at
wherever they got
Midway.
sent. Yeah.
They saw the whole thing, you know, and then they came home and they put their uniforms away and they went to work,
Yeah.
you know, and they raised their families and they paid their taxes. And when we would meet, I became very close with these guys. I'm proud to say they made me an honorable member of the Pearl Harbor survivors.
That's cool.
And when they're sitting and talking, they're very rarely talking about the day.
Yeah.
They've kind of been there and done that, you know. So they're talking about what's for lunch, or they're talking about their grandkids, or um, it's kind of, life stuff.
Yeah.
They've been there. But I did hear a lot of stories, and it is very fascinating. It is very fascinating. It was very fascinating to find out where each of them was. Where were
Hmm.
they in that
Yeah.
harbor? This guy was on a submarine, and anyway, and some of them were out there helping to recover wounded, and
Oh,
um, it was just astounding to think, here again, they're 18 years old, and this is what they're doing on that day. Another thing, and I would mention that Dean Darrow was one of these. He did not hold a big grudge against the Japanese. Now certainly for a while there, if these guys come back from war,
and they shot him in the heart, and he doesn't hold a grudge.
yeah,
Isn't that? Yeah.
they kind of, it's sort of like you think, well, I would have shot him in the heart, if I'd had
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
chance. Right?
Right.
That's
They
what
weren't.
you're there for.
That's right.
That's your job. That's your job.
One of the
And
things that you wrote is that the morning of the attack, or the night before, his chief concern was to wipe the coffee rings off of the top of the weaponry, right?
yeah, that
Like
was
that's
kind of
he was just walking around cleaning up.
that was one of his, that was when probably when he was a very junior fire controlman. Because first, like I think everybody who not in the military, you read fire controlman and you think it's a firefighter, but it doesn't. It
Hmm.
has to do with artillery fire,
Yeah.
cannon fire. Um, but yeah, he said, so there he's in, when he was
Yeah.
new, they told him, this piece of equipment here, let's make sure we don't have any coffee cup rings on it. They kind of did it all.
What did he end up doing for his career?
Well, he worked for a Sperry company. It was a maritime company, so he was working on gyroscopes and other navigational equipment aboard
Hmm.
ships, and this was carrying on what he'd learned in the Navy. So he put
Hmm.
his Navy training to work, and he was very sought after for his skill. And I wish it's let's just say he worked on navigational equipment on large ships,
Hmm.
because I don't know anything more about than that.
And
But that was his entire career, and he evidently did well. I know they traveled overseas for his work, and then they bought a 2-story house near the lake in Lake County, and
hmm.
they had a very good life, and they were very much in love, and have a wonderful family. It is a beautiful thing to see Alice with her daughter Becky. And they play cards, and they travel, and they have a very good life.
What a great story. Thank you so much
Isn't it a
for
great story?
it really is. Thank you for bringing it to the Press Democrat and then bringing it here to the Mark Thompson show as well. What a wonderful. I
Um,
mean, you don't think you're going to hear something so great on such a remembrance of a sad day, right?
it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. And I'm, and through my career, I was attracted to that kind of story.
Mhm.
You got to write all kinds of stories, but I always preferred the human story, um, the moving story,
Yeah.
the genuine story that didn't involve people hitting each other over the head and screaming at
Absolutely.
each other. It happens. You got to cover the news.
That's
But
true.
when I was a columnist, I just migrated toward um, the stories that are a little more easy
Well,
to take over.
this is the one where you're going to write the screenplay, right? I mean, this has to be
Well,
told on a
actually,
grander scale.
her daughter Becky said to me yesterday, or maybe just this morning, that she hopes somebody will make a movie out of it. I mean, I said to her, Hollywood has done more with less, or less with more
Right.
with
No,
less, as far as
this is a screenplay you should write. You should
this.
sit down right now and write it out. This is it. So
Okay, I have some
you're
time this afternoon. I'll write the screenplay.
I
Yeah.
like it. So you're with the Press Democrat, but you're not full time anymore. You're kind of what,
I am
semi-retired?
retired. I'm
Okay.
retired, and so, like, I'm looking at this story. The byline says by Chris Smith for the Press Democrat, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm a contract employee, a stringer, um,
Okay.
uh, um, and they mostly have me write obituaries for
Okay.
well-known people here in Sonoma County,
Mm-hmm.
and then I do an occasional other type of story. But yeah, I retired. I was there. I started with the Press Democrat in 1977 after earning my journalism degree at San Jose State University, the Harvard of the
Awesome.
West.
Very cool. What
And
an absolute Go ahead. I'm sorry.
it just did it. I just thought I couldn't have been in a better place
Yeah.
for my career than in Sonoma County, and writing the type of stories that you hope help to bind a community
Mm-hmm.
rather than divide a community. These common stories, it could have happened to any of us, kind of thing. And hey, by the way, who happens to be living next door?
Yeah.
Somebody with this
It's what we
extraordinary
need more
story.
of, Chris Smith. I'm sorry to see that you're retired, but maybe that means you have more time to come on the Mark Thompson show now and then and pop on and talk with us, because what an absolute pleasure it's been to meet you. You're a great
Thank you.
storyteller and a wonderful human being.
Thank you. I
Yeah,
really
thank you for
appreciate it, Kim. Thank you very much. It's
thank
been
you.
a
What a pleasure. I hope to talk to you soon.
thank
Bye,
you.
Chris. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.